Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be going over how you would go about modeling something with organic features such as this Xbox controller. So over this series, it's about 7 parts I think. We talk about how you'd go about making these organic curves on the sides of the controllers, how you can actually fake the geometry like the thumbstick holders. They're actually just stuck to the surface of the controller with a modifier, but it looks pretty natural. So, just little simple tricks and tips on how you might tackle something like this. We also briefly go over normal maps. It's a little complicated, but if you pause the video and kind of go over what I'm doing, it's pretty easy once you figure out how to do it. But yeah, so I mean, we cover some pretty cool things. Like I think my personal favorite are the buttons. How you can add that. It's really easy. Just using some text in Blender and tweaking the materials just right. Also adding the buttons, like those little decals, and everything should be in the description with a download link to all the resources that I use in this tutorial. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Okay, so you can see that I have a brand new workspace right here, and we are working in 2.8. So if you kind of want to make sure you're up with the latest version I believe it's still in beta. So anyways, let's just get right into it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to want to set up some reference images, and this will help with the actual modeling of the controller. So I'm going to do first is hit A to select all the objects in the scene. I'm going to press X and delete, so we have a clean workspace. And then we need to add in our reference pictures. And Blender 2.8 is a bit different with how compared to how you used to do it in Blender 2.7. You no longer have to press N and change it in this local view. Now there's objects specifically for reference pictures. So what you have to do is you hit Shift A and you go down to Image, and then you can just add reference. And what it'll do is it'll open up a file explorer, and I can go to the folder that I have the reference pictures in. And if you check the description, I should have all the necessary resources that you need for this tutorial series, including these reference pictures. So let's start out with front reference. So I'm going to double click front reference. You can see it places it in, but it places it in the direction that the camera was facing. So what we need to do is we need to kind of reposition this for our modeling. So we're going to hit Alt and R to reset the rotation, and then we're going to press R and then X, and then that'll lock the X, and we're going to type in 90 and then press Enter to lock it in. So it's kind of like a front-facing camera or front-facing reference picture. So if I press 1 on the numpad, or alternatively press the screen dot up here, you'll see it locks it in our front-facing view. So now we need to import that side view, and we're going to hit Shift A, Image, Reference, and then we're going to double click side reference, and you see the same problem. So we're going to press Alt R, and we're going to press R to rotate, and we're going to rotate around the, I believe the Y, yep. So we're going to press R, Y, and I'm going to type -90. And that still isn't quite how I want it. I actually want it to be flipped along the x-axis. So what we're going to do is we're going to press S, and then we're going to press Y, and we're going to scale it along the Y, but you're going to see it just stretches it. So what we're going to do is we're going to type -1, and it'll flip it around for us. So see, if I press 1, this is the front-facing view. If I press 3, this is the side view. And again, you can kind of just press these little dots up here to change views if you want, or if you don't have a numpad. And you notice that the side view is actually a little bit bigger than the front-facing view, but once we start modeling the general layout for the controller, we'll fix that. So anyways, we're going to hit 1 on the numpad to go into this front-facing view. I'm going to press Alt-R to deselect everything. And what we're going to do is we're going to drop down a cube to start blocking out this shape. And the way I designed this controller is kind of hacky. Since it has a very organic shape, I'm going to use some modifiers and play around with the object until I get something that I feel comfortable with, that actually looks like an Xbox controller. But we'll get to that in a second. So starting off, we're going to want to just drop in a basic primitive. So I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to drop in a cube. And you see here's our cube right here. And I'm going to press Z and then go into wireframe so we can see through it and actually see our reference picture. We're going to be doing this a lot, so just make sure you either press Z to swap between wireframe or solid, or alternatively you can come up here and you can see you can swap between these 2 buttons up here in the top right of the viewport. So while in wireframe, we're going to hit G and then Z, and we're going to bring it up bring it up so this line is lined up against the top of the controller. And I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to Alt R or Alt A to deselect, and we're going to hit Control R to drop in an edge loop right here. And I'm going to right click to make sure it stays centered. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hit B to box select, and we're going to select these side edges. And remember, you have to be in wireframe mode for most of these, because, for example, if I was in solid view and I B box select this, it only selects the front vertices and not the back ones, and we want to select all of them. So again, I'm going to tab into wireframe, select it all, X, delete vertices. You can see now we have a box. If I hit Shift H to single this out, you see we have half of a box, and we're going to mirror the other half of the controller so we can kind of, save some time when it comes to modeling this controller. So I'm going to hit Alt H to bring back everything again, go back into this front facing view. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to then shrink this box a bit. So while in wireframe, I'm going to hit B to box select these bottom vertices, and I'm going to press G and then hit Z to lock it on the Z axis. I'm going to drag it up to right about here, should be fine for now. I'm going to box select these side ones, and we're actually going to turn on these arrows over here so we can quickly drag. That looks good. And remember, I'm using Alt A to deselect everything and then just B box selecting it. And actually, we're going to want to add a supporting loop right here. Again, Control R. And then you just click to place it when you're happy with where it is. And we're going to kind of mesh it to the general shape of the controller. So I'm just going to box it, and I'm going to hit E to extrude. And we're going to just keep blocking out the general shape of this controller. And all I'm doing is I'm extruding, and then in that case, I extruded, but then I right-clicked, so it's on top of the object we just extruded, and I'm just dragging it out like that. But first, what we're going to want to do is we're going to drag these vertices down a bit. And you can see I'm just box selecting, extruding, until I get to the edge right about here. And we'll also drag this bottom vertice so it's all the way over. And you see this this shape right here is a little weird. It isn't a perfect square. It's still a square, but this vertex right here is almost overlapping, and we want to make sure it's still like a convex shape so it doesn't cause any rendering glitches. So now that we have this general shape made right here, and you see we still have this like little bump right here, I think we can actually move that over a bit, bump it up a little bit. That looks good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to bring this down and continue the shape. So I'm going to press E, and you can see when I press E, it automatically locked in the Z for me. So I'm just going to drag it down a bit, right about here. I'm going to drag this vertex over, and you can see since this shape is pretty consistent, we don't need too much supporting geometry. But we're actually going to be bending the shape to kind of make this side view right here. So what we want to do is we want to add in some of that extra geometry anyway. So I'm going to hit Control R and add in some edge loops, and then I'm going to right click to make sure they're just kind of there. And you can see we have a bunch of supporting lines for bending later on. Anyways, I'm going to continue with this process of dragging it down until we get all the way to the bottom here. Okay, and you can see we kind of have this front view made. Now we need to continue extruding down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these 1, 2, 3, 4 vertices, and I'm going to extrude them down. I'm going to kind of make sure that these vertices are following the general shape and flow. And feel free if you want to bring these vertices over like this, so you can see we're kind of making the flow of the geometry a bit more smooth, not as rough, it's kind of hard to see these vertices, so we're just going to keep pulling them over until we get a nice smooth shape. You can see it's not the best, but it's not a huge deal if they're perfect, because we're going to be using some modifiers later. That's pretty much it. We just got to keep making the basic shape, and then later on we obviously have to mess with the side view as well. And then we'll extrude these down one more time, right about here. And selecting these all, I'll just press G to kind of move it over a bit. And if I'm going too fast, feel free to pause and then move the geometry around until it looks somewhat similar to mine. I'm making this a bit faster because I'm not really aiming this towards, super beginners. This is more so for people who want to get into more advanced modeling techniques. And for this last one, instead of extruding all four of them, I'm actually going to select these two middle ones right here. I'm just going to press G and drag them down a bit. I'm going to kind of round them off to this corner. So as you can see here, we have a general layout. It looks pretty similar. You'll notice we aren't really making the supporting geometry for this indent, and that's because it's actually really annoying to deal with that. I'll show you a bit of a hacky workaround to kind of give the illusion of that depth. But anyways, this looks pretty good for now. So you can see we have our front-facing view. And you can see it looks very thick, but we'll be fixing that in a second. But now that we have a general front-facing outline that lines pretty well with the front reference, what we're going to do is we're going to hit 3 on the numpad to go into side view. And you can see this reference is a bit too big for our object. So what we're going to do is we're just going to press S and scale it down a bit. If we have to, we can go into wireframe view to kind of get a better idea. You can see the outline right there. And I'm going to scale it down a bit more, and I'm going to hit G and then Z and drag it up a bit until what we want is the bottom to be lined up with the bottom and the top to be lined up with this like little edge loop, not the actual buttons, of course. That looks pretty good. So now what we can do is we want to fit it to the actual width of the controller. So I'm going to tab back into edit mode by hitting tab. I'm going to scale it on the y-axis here so you can see we can kind of mess with the width. And I'm going to hit B to box select all these vertices on the side. I'm just going to manually drag these in so it's lined up right about here. And yeah, that looks pretty good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add that curve that you see right there. And this could be a bit tricky. You might have to finick with it. It might be a little finicky. You might have to mess with it a bit. And one thing that is very important is if you kind of want to make like a little save for your objects, like say you're about to mess with the geometry and you're really nervous about, you don't want to mess up and ruin all your work. There's a couple things you can do. One, the most obvious, you can hit save, save as, and you can save this as a copy. Like for example, I can save it here and name it Xbox controller like checkpoint 2 or something like that. Or what you can also do, if you just want to have one Blender file, you can come over here to collections and you can click this little collection box, and you'll see it'll make a new collection, and you can name this backup 1. And then what you can do is with your controller selected, you can hit Shift D, and you'll notice now there's 2 of them. So if I go into solid view, now there's 2 of them. But you see it's still in this collection. So what you can do is with that duplicate still selected, you can hit M to move it, and you can move it to backup collection 1. And then you can get rid of all these, you can click all these little buttons. So for example, this one makes it visible, so that hides it. This one makes it so we can't select it. This one makes it so it doesn't render, and this one makes it so it doesn't show in the viewport. This one makes sure that it doesn't show in the render. And when you do it to the collection, it does it to all the objects in the collection below. So that's another way to do it. Yeah, so that's just a general way to back up your stuff if about to do something with your geometry that you're not sure about. Anyways, we're going to tab back into edit mode, and what we're going to do is we're going to grab these bottom vertices, and what we're going to do is we're going to turn on proportional editing. So if we change this to enable right here, and we're going to leave it on the smooth preset, and what this will do is you'll see when I drag these vertices around, there's a circle of influence, and if I use the scroll wheel to increase it, we can actually influence the entire shape of the object. If I right click, it'll go back to where it was, of course. And what we want to do first is we want to scale this down a bit. So I'm going to scale it down. Actually, we'll move it first. So I'm going to hit G to grab it, and we're going to place it right about here with that big of an influence. Just kind of copy that the best you can. Then we're going to rotate a bit. And we're going to scale it down, change the influence a bit to kind of match the controller shape. And we're going to just drag it over. We're going to rotate it a bit. I think that looks pretty good. And now what we're going to do is we're going to deselect that. We're going to grab these this side collection of faces. And what we're going to do is we're going to to grab this, lower the influence a bit if you have to, and we're just going to kind of make this general shape that we have here. You can see this bottom set of vertices is still kind of weird. So what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of shrink this down a bit. Actually, maybe we should just select these edges right here. You can see if we shrink those down, go back into solid view, you see that looks almost okay, but we might want to drag these out. So I'm going to turn off proportional editing, and we're going to just grab these two vertices right here, and we're just going to kind of drag them out a bit, because we don't want it to really be concave. We want it to be kind of bulging out a bit to go with like the general shape of the controller, you know. Doesn't have to be perfect though. Yeah, let's just drag these out a bit, because my proportional editing might have been a little sloppy. You can see that looks decent enough. Yeah, that looks fine. We're going to do the same thing on the back side though, because I kind of messed this up a bit. And I haven't messed the geometry up enough to warrant going back to our little backup that we created, so it's just kind of messing with it till it looks good enough. Looks like we actually... Oh yeah, so this, we have to be careful with this one, because if we go to face select here, you can see this is one face. So we need to make sure this vertex isn't bumping into anything. So we can select both of these vertices, and if we double tap G, we can slide them out a bit. And then we can just kind of grab them and pull them down. I think that looks okay. Let's make sure these vertices are also just kind of sticking out just a little bit. So the problem with making these organic shapes is it can be a little wonky if you're not like going based off like a sculpted model or something like that. Yeah, we want to make sure that these are nice and like pointing out. I think that looks good enough. Everything else should be smoothed out when we add modifiers. So, and also this middle portion is kind of jutting out a bit too much. If you can kind of see in our side view, it is very far. So we can probably turn on proportional editing again for this. And let's just select this one for now. Actually, we'll leave it off. These references are kind of getting in the way, so with the controller selected, I'm going to hit Shift H to hide them real quick. So let's just kind of drag this back a bit. And then that looks good enough. Maybe drag these back a bit as well. We just kind of want a bit of a smoothing going on. We don't want it to be too jagged. So I think that looks good. And while we're here, let's get rid of some of these faces that were created when we extruded the general shape downward. So selecting them all, hit X, and then delete faces. There we go, because remember, we're going to be mirroring this later, and that'll cause a bunch of artifacts. Anyways, let's hit Alt-H in object mode to bring everything back. We'll go back to the side view, wireframe. You see we need to create this back dent as well. So while in edit mode, let's go back to vertex select. I'm going to select these two faces, turn back on proportional editing, and let's hit G and then Y, and we're just going to kind of grab these and pull them back a bit. I think that looks pretty good. We could probably afford to drag all this geometry back a bit, bring up that influence if we can. Let's see how that looks. That looks pretty good. And it still looks like half a controller, so let's fix that real quick. So with our controller selected, we can go to Modifiers, we can add modifier, and then we can just hit Mirror. And as long as the right axis is selected, in this case it's the X. If you don't have this look, make sure your axis is select. In this case for me it's the X. And you can see that looks like a controller. If I hide everything else, looks decent. And then before I end this episode, I'll also show you what we're going for. So obviously this is a very blocky controller. It doesn't look very realistic. But if we add another modifier, subdivision surface, you can see we're kind of getting that... let me do that again. I kind of did that very fast. We go add modifier, and we go to subdivision surface. You can kind of see our controller taking shape. And then with the object selected, if I go to object and shade smooth, it looks pretty good. You can see from the front facing view, if I bring back our Xbox controller, um, so like for example, hidden there, you can kind of see it's taking shape. And the reason it's cut off at the bottom is because our reference is kind of cutting through it. So what we can do is grab our reference and then hit G, then Y, and take it all the way back. And then our front facing view, you can see there's our controller taking shape. So yep, this has been part one of the controller modeling series. So in the next one, we're going to we're going to show you how you can apply the subsurf and how we can make the geometry a bit simpler so it's easier to unwrap and it doesn't require as many resources, so you can like import this into a game engine or something like that. So thanks for watching. If this video was too fast, please put your input in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more. I try to post these videos as often as possible. So yeah, thanks for watching.